The night Heath Ledger lost himself inside the Joker wasn't really one night at all. It was the moment when a role he loved slowly started to swallow pieces of the man he actually was. People saw the Joker and called it genius, but almost no one saw how much it cost him to become that character. Heath didn't just act the Joker. He lived with the Joker's thoughts in his head, the late-night whispers, the racing mind, the notebook where he wrote dark ideas to stay in character. What began as acting slowly turned into something else, something heavier. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't turn his mind off. The lines between himself and the Joker began to blur, like two colors mixing until you can't separate them anymore. Plato once warned that when you wear a mask for too long, it starts to stick to your soul. And for Heath, the mask didn't just stay on his face. It followed him into his nights, his hotel rooms, and the parts of himself he never talked about. Everyone praised the performance, but no one noticed the quiet collapse happening underneath it. And that collapse didn't start with the Joker. It started years earlier, with a very different kind of mask. Long before the Joker ever challenged him, Heath was already carrying a role he never asked for. He grew up as the kid who made everything look easy, the one teachers praised, friends admired, and adults expected to shine without effort. People talked about him like he had a natural magic that would always keep him ahead. And when you grow up hearing that, you start to feel like you must match that image every single day, even when you're tired or unsure. Over time, Heath learned something many gifted kids secretly learn. People love you as long as you look confident and strong. So he kept showing that version of himself. He smiled, stayed calm, and pushed himself to do well, even when he felt overwhelmed on the inside. Psychologists call this performing competence, acting fine even when you're confused, acting strong even when you're stressed, and acting like nothing bothers you even when something does. Carl Jung would call this a persona, a kind of public face people build so the world sees what it wants to see. Heath's persona wasn't dark or dramatic. It was charming, friendly, talented, and easygoing. But even a bright persona can hide deep feelings, and the longer you use it, the harder it becomes to admit when you're struggling. Inside, Heath felt a quiet restlessness, a constant sense that he had to keep proving himself. It wasn't something anyone forced on him. It was something he carried alone. Whenever he succeeded, he didn't feel fully proud. Whenever he failed, he felt like he let everyone down. So he kept pushing, kept working, kept moving, always trying to stay ahead of whatever fear was whispering inside him. And the strange thing about these early roles is that you don't feel their weight
until much later. Heath didn't see it then, but hiding his worries behind confidence created a small crack inside him. A crack he carried quietly for years, long before the Joker even existed. That small crack eventually turned into something deeper, a belief he almost never shared. Beneath the calm face he showed the world, Heath lived with a quiet fear that he might not be enough. Not enough to keep people proud. Not enough to deserve the love he received. This wasn't a loud fear. It was a soft one, the kind that sits in the background of your mind like a shadow. Psychologists call this the mindset of an unworthy overachiever. Someone who keeps working harder and harder because they're scared of what might happen if they ever slow down. It wasn't ambition driving him. It was the fear of slipping, of failing, of not living up to the image everyone believed in. That fear didn't come from fame. It came from childhood patterns, the kind where love often feels tied to how well you behave or perform. People with this kind of attachment grow up feeling like their worth is something fragile, something they must keep proving over and over again. When things go right, they don't fully feel it. When things go wrong, they take it as a sign that something is wrong with them. For Heath, that feeling showed up as constant motion. He filled his time with travel, new projects, ideas, and activities. He wasn't running away from success. He was running away from the quiet moments where his fears felt the loudest. Buddhists say that running from the self is the root of suffering, and that's exactly what was happening. The busier he stayed, the less he had to face the voice inside him that whispered he might not be enough. On the outside, this made him look confident, creative, and unstoppable. On the inside, it created a hidden pressure that never fully went away. He kept trying, kept pushing, kept proving, hoping that the feeling of being enough would finally appear. But it never stayed long, and because no one knew this part of him, he carried it alone. This wound wasn't dramatic. It didn't explode. It simply lived inside him, quietly shaping how he acted, worked, and saw himself. And he could carry it, until a role finally asked him to be completely honest with emotions he usually avoided. He didn't know it yet, but this hidden fear, the fear of not being enough, was the very thing that made the Joker role far more dangerous than anyone expected. The fear Heath carried,
the one he never spoke about, stayed invisible for years. But when he stepped into the Joker, everything shifted. This role didn't give him a place to hide behind confidence or charm. It didn't let him smile through discomfort or tuck his emotions away. It demanded something he wasn't used to giving: full, unfiltered honesty. Most people think acting is about pretending, but Heath didn't work that way.
He didn't want to fake a character on the surface. He wanted to understand what made a person think the way they did, what made their emotions twist, what made their choices make sense to them. To reach that depth, he had to open doors inside himself that he usually kept locked. That's when he started The Notebook, not as a dramatic prop, but as a private space where he let his mind loosen. He filled it with scattered jokes, strange thoughts, doodles, and lines that didn't follow any rules. It wasn't about becoming dark. It was about letting go of control. For someone who spent most of his life staying composed, that kind of freedom felt both exciting and unfamiliar. Neuroscientists have a term for this kind of deep emotional connection: empathic over-identification. It's when your brain blends the feelings of another person, even a fictional one, with your own. For many actors, this connection stays light and safe. But Heath wasn't an actor who held back. And because he already carried a hidden wound inside him, the connection went deeper than he expected. This wasn't the version of method acting people like to exaggerate. Heath didn't walk around acting evil, and he didn't treat people harshly on set. What he did do was allow himself to feel emotions he normally avoided: confusion, vulnerability, frustration, fear. He let those feelings exist in The Notebook, in the voice he practiced, in the unpredictable energy he gave the role. And when an actor invites real emotions into a character like that, something quiet but powerful happens. The line between the character and the self doesn't disappear, but it becomes thinner. Not in a dramatic way, but in a human way. Two emotional worlds start sitting close together. For the first time in his life, Heath wasn't performing charm or confidence. He wasn't wearing the old golden boy mask. The Joker stripped those habits away and asked him to step into a rawer version of himself. One that didn't rely on being perfect, strong, or impressive. Heath had spent years trying to stay in control of how others saw him. The Joker was the first role that asked him to let go of that control. And once he opened that door, something unexpected happened. The role started showing him parts of himself he had never wanted to face. As Heath went deeper into the Joker, the role began reflecting things he normally kept buried. People often think dark roles are dangerous because they're violent or chaotic. But for Heath, the real danger wasn't the Joker's madness. It was the way the character echoed pieces of his own inner world, the parts he never talked about. Carl Jung believed that everyone carries a shadow, the hidden side of your personality that you push away because it doesn't match the image you show the world. Most of the time, that shadow stays quiet, but certain experiences can wake it up. Certain emotions bring it to the surface, and certain roles force you to look straight at it. That's exactly what the Joker did to him. The character wasn't just unpredictable. He was free in a way Heath rarely allowed himself to be. The Joker didn't worry about pleasing anyone. He didn't care about being perfect. He didn't hide his emotions or pretend everything was fine. Heath didn't admire that darkness, but he recognized something familiar inside it. A part of himself that felt trapped by expectations. A part that was tired of performing strength all the time. And this wasn't about becoming the Joker. It was about facing the emotions he usually pushed away. Frustration, confusion, sadness, fear. The things he didn't talk about because he didn't want to disappoint anyone. When he explored the Joker's mind, those feelings didn't stay neatly inside the notebook. They started showing up in the quiet moments. Late nights alone, empty hotel rooms, pauses between takes where the golden boy smile didn't fit anymore. Psychologists call this emotional bleed-through, when feelings from a role begin mixing with your own because the emotional boundaries aren't solid. For most actors, this doesn't go very deep, but for someone who had spent years avoiding his darker feelings, it hit harder. The Joker didn't hurt Heath, the Joker uncovered him. Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but grows." Heath had resisted his shadow for years, but the notebook didn't resist it. The character didn't resist it. The work didn't resist it. Slowly, the emotions he usually hid, the ones he worked so hard to keep quiet, began rising to the surface. Not in dramatic, scary ways, but in subtle ones. Sleepless nights, moments of intensity, a mind that wouldn't settle. It wasn't madness, it was honesty, finally coming up for air.
For the first time in his life, Heath had to face the parts of himself he had been running from since he was young. And the hardest part of looking into a mirror like that is realizing you don't fully recognize the reflection. The Joker didn't change who he was. It revealed what he had never allowed himself to see. And once that truth was awake inside him, it didn't quiet down easily. When those hidden emotions finally reached the surface, they didn't break Heath, but they did leave his mind overstimulated in a way he wasn't used to. His thoughts became busier, louder, and harder to slow down. And when the mind becomes that active, sleep is often the first thing to disappear. What began as a few restless nights slowly turned into something much heavier: real insomnia. Insomnia isn't just not sleeping. Neuroscientists explain that when the brain stays in emotional alert mode, it refuses to power down. The mind keeps spinning, replaying moments, replaying feelings, replaying thoughts that never settle. Heath talked about lying awake for hours, staring at the sun.
Ceiling, unable to calm his mind. Every night made the next one harder. Every sunrise made him feel more drained. Sleep is the boundary that keeps emotions in balance. When that boundary breaks, everything becomes harder to separate. Small worries start feeling huge. Focus becomes blurry. The line between imagination and stress grows thin. None of this had anything to do with the Joker's darkness. It was simply the biology of an exhausted brain trying to function without rest. Heath once said his mind felt like it was running at 1,000 miles per hour. He tried everything: warm baths, stretching, lying still, but nothing worked. The more he tried to fall asleep, the more awake he felt. It became a loop he couldn't escape. Doctors say that even 1 or 2 nights of poor sleep can make the amygdala, the part of the brain that controls fear, up to 60% more reactive. After weeks of lost sleep, the effect becomes overwhelming. Thoughts feel sharper, emotions feel heavier. Ordinary stress begins to blend together in uncomfortable ways. The brain becomes noisy, restless, almost electric. That's what was happening to Heath. The notebook that once helped him act now kept his thoughts active. The emotions he finally allowed himself to feel refused to settle. And without sleep to wash those emotions away, they began stacking on top of each other until every day felt a little harder than the last. This wasn't collapse. This wasn't identity loss. This was the cost of a mind running without rest. When sleep disappears, the body keeps going, but the mind slowly begins to fray. Night after night, Heath found himself stuck in a cycle where exhaustion became the background of his life. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just endlessly draining. He once said softly, "I can't stop thinking." And that non-stop thinking became the doorway to something far more serious. The moment his inner balance began to slip. What came next wasn't just tiredness. It was the slow loss of the inner steadiness he depended on. When someone goes too long without rest, the mind stops feeling like one solid piece. Thoughts don't line up. Emotions don't sync. Things inside start drifting apart, even if everything on the outside still looks normal. Heath kept working, kept showing up, kept acting like everything was fine. But inside, he felt his sense of self slipping. Psychologists call this identity fragmentation, when your thoughts and feelings no longer move in the same direction. It's not dramatic or loud. It's more like feeling slightly out of place in your own life, even while you're still living it. That's when the dissociation began. Some moments, he felt like he was watching himself instead of being himself, as if he were one step away from his own experience. People feel this when the mind is overwhelmed and tries to protect itself by disconnecting. It isn't a failure, it's a sign of overload. Actors often talk about the observer, the quiet inner voice that tells them, "This is the character, and this is me." But exhaustion makes that voice fade. And when it fades too much, you lose the thing that keeps your identity steady. The feelings from work, the pressure from life, and the emotions he opened for the Joker all began blending together in ways he couldn't sort out anymore. Camus wrote that the hardest moments in life are the ones that stop making emotional sense. That was the space Heath had entered, a place where his mind felt scattered, where he couldn't always trust his own reactions, where nothing felt quite grounded. Seneca once said, "What breaks us is not the load, but the fractures already inside." Heath had one of those fractures, the fear of not being enough, and exhaustion pushed right into it.
The more tired he became, the more that old fear returned, not as a thought, but as a feeling that spread through everything. None of this was dramatic. None of it was loud. It was the quiet breaking point behind the cameras. The moment when holding himself together became harder than anyone around him could see. Not chaos, not madness, just a man who had carried too much for too long, slowly losing the inner balance he had protected his whole life. And looking back, this quiet breaking was the beginning of what now feels like the night he lost himself. By the time that night arrived, it wasn't about one scene, one choice, or one decision. It was everything added together. The years of trying to be enough, the role that forced him to feel what he usually hid, and the long stretch of nights where sleep never truly came. On the outside, he was still Heath Ledger, kind, professional, focused. But on the inside, he no longer felt like the steady version of himself he once knew. When the brain is that tired, it struggles to keep things separate. Thoughts blur into each other, feelings overlap. Old fears mix with new stress until it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. Heath wasn't turning into the Joker, but the honesty he had opened for that character didn't shut off just because the cameras stopped rolling. The doubts he carried, the emotions he unlocked, and the exhaustion he lived with were now all sitting in the same crowded space in his mind. Most actors rely on a quiet inner reminder that says, "This is the role, this is me." That inner line keeps their real self safe. But Heath's mind was worn down, and that line had faded. He wasn't confused about reality. He knew who he was, but he no longer felt a clear difference between the part of him that was working and the part of him that was simply trying to survive. It's like holding two heavy bags in each hand for too long. At some point, your arms don't care what's in them. They just know they can't hold it much longer. So that night wasn't a dramatic scene
World could point to. It was more like a quiet moment alone, maybe in a room, maybe in a bed he couldn't fall asleep in, where he felt that something inside him had slipped past the point of control. Not because he was weak, not because he didn't care, but because no one, no matter how talented or brave, can carry that much pressure, that much honesty, and that little rest without something giving way. He didn't vanish into the Joker. He simply reached the limit of what his tired mind and hurting heart could hold. And that is the saddest part of this whole story. Not that he played a dark character, but that the human being behind the performance ran out of strength long before the world ran out of praise. Heath's story doesn't just show what happened to one actor. It shows something bigger about all of us. We love talent, we love brilliance, and we love the finished result on screen. But we almost never see the weight people carry while trying to give us that brilliance. The world praised his performance, but it didn't notice how alone he felt while trying to stay strong. Lao Tzu once said that a person finds peace by returning to their center, by coming back to who they really are. But our world often pushes people away from their center, asking them to shine, impress, and perform instead of rest, breathe, and be human. Heath's life reminds us that even the brightest lights need gentleness. Even the strongest faces hide quiet battles. And even the people who make us feel something are fighting to feel steady themselves. His reflection is a reminder to look past the performance, in others and in ourselves, and choose honesty over perfection. Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this.